What's up everyone, I'm Paul. Welcome back to Stateside Fishing. In today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how I utilize this 1.5 millimeter one-step looper to make my fishing shanks. I also have a 3.0 and I also have one like this that's like a 3-in-1, although this one does not work as well as these do. But anyway, there's a couple things that need to be done to this thing before you get started. Actually just one main thing, and a couple things you need to look out for, like what wire size not to use or exceed, so you don't break this thing, because you can break it if you use too heavy of wire diameter. All you have to do is cut the piece off here on the right. You can see there's a hole through it, so I cut it right at the hole. And to do that, I'm going to use my bandsaw. You could use a sawzall, or you could use just a little handsaw. Would probably be better than a sawzall in my opinion. But I'm going to use a bandsaw. I'm an electrician, so I have that available. I like to hold it closed when I cut it. That prevents any kind of vibrations. It seems like you get a cleaner cut at the end. And always wear some safety glasses. How well you guys are going to see that. Try to position it to where you could see it. Well, once you have it cut, you can take a file to deburr it, and it should look like this. You can see I cut it right at the center of that circle, and I will be using that as a gauge for how long my shanks will be. So let me show you how to make a couple real quick. Okay, now that we have our loopers ready to go, let's make a shank. This is a 0.035 wire diameter. You do not want to exceed that wire diameter. If you go to like 0.040 and up, you could break one of these arms. Like this one is broken here, but it still works. I just use some pliers when bending the 3.0. The front loop will be 1.5 millimeter. The back loop will be a 3.0 millimeter. That's going to create a very nice articulation in the water. The 1.5 millimeter loop eliminates the forward and back gap, and it can basically only go left and right, and that's what creates a nice articulation. So let's make that shank first, and I will be using this as a gauge. If you cut this too low, you're gonna have to measure your wire, and that every time you make a shank you have to make a little measurement, which gets really annoying. So remember to keep this and use this as a gauge. For the shank that I'm making, I know I have to be a little bit past this. If I'm using a smaller wire diameter, I'm making a smaller shank, I know I have to be a little bit more this way. Anyway, let's make the bend. Now before you make the full bend, you either grab this with your fingers or you can use some pliers. For the small shanks, I use the pliers. This one is big enough to where I can just hold it with my fingers. What that does is it prevents this wire from surpassing the one on the bottom. If it does surpass it, you're not going to get a nice bend. So just hold it with your fingers or with the pliers. There you go. And now flip it over. The reason you want to flip it over and bend it again, because right now you can see the bend is a little bit more on one side. So to even that out, you just flip it over, give it another little bend, and there it is. You have a nice 1.5 millimeter loop. And now we're going to make the 3.0 on the other side. I started making these simply because they weren't available anywhere. And I knew that the problem with the shanks that were available was the hook gaps. The shank gaps, sorry, the hook gaps, the shank gaps. They were too big. The forward and back play would basically prevent the left and right articulation. So you can see now we have this shank, and to straighten it, make sure it's perfectly straight, I like to use some pliers, and I put them down onto the table. That way I know I'm level. And I take some split ring pliers on this side, and I make sure that it's a perfect 90 degrees. These two swim flies I tied in 2019. I'll throw a picture of it from my Facebook so you guys could see. And even back then, I already had my dual loop size shanks made. I just didn't post them until about 4 years ago. I can see the small gap and loop in front, and then the big 3.0 loop in back. Same on this one. I kind of pushed the hair out of the way so you guys could see. Very small gap forward to back, and big loop in back here. This one's a little harder to see. There you go. So I have been making these for actually over 6 years now. I think the most important factor of getting a good articulation is how to close off these loops on these shanks. So let me show you that real quick. Here's a perfect example of that. You can see the 3.0 millimeter loop, which is the back loop, is closed about halfway. That's going to prevent any tangles when you're casting. And you can see the 1.5 millimeter loop is closed off to where there is barely any play. You have about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch forward and back, and I think that's about perfect. Obviously you don't want to close it off too much to where there is no play, because you're not going to get any articulation. I also make these transformer shanks. They allow you to change heads, change tails, and when incorporated with my swim fly shanks, you can make some really cool patterns. This one, for example, has 1, 2, 3, 4 swim fly shanks and 1, 2 transformer shanks. This front one allows you to change your head. This back one allows you to change your hook or your tail. So basically what I can do is take this one head and put any of these tails on. I can take these and mix and match them with the tails, so you have different colors. You can have 2 or 3 in one flies. I do have some videos on how to make these, how they work and everything. And all these products are available on my website. So thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and thank you very much for subscribing. Until the next one, peace.